All right, so let's now talk about unbilled expenses or unbilled charges. They're called both within QuickBooks Online. And the main thing in this video really being how to set it up. Because once they're set up, I think using them is really straightforward and easy. But the setup process, I believe right now to be a little bit broken and definitely, I believe to be overly complicated more so than it needs to be. But hopefully in this video, we'll be able to work through it and help you get this set up with, whatever works best for you in your business. Basically what they are is just allowing you to have the ability to, whenever you're buying things, and to be able to ultimately charge your customers or clients for those things on their invoices. So if you buy $100 of supplies and then you want to keep track in your bookkeeping to be able to add that $100 to your future client's invoice at to reimburse yourself or to mark it up and make more money. And there's a lot of benefits to this in terms of tracking by expenses and income by customer with the reporting, but I think probably the main one is that you don't leave any income on the table, and so you're not forgetting to add things that you could be adding to your client or customer invoices, and you're not leaving any income on the table. So there is benefits to this for sure. The first thing that we'll go over before we start talking about how to turn these settings on and how to set them up is that to kind of work backwards and see what we're ultimately trying to achieve here with this setup and what we're trying to tell QuickBooks Online to do and how to handle this. With all of this, from the expense side onto the ultimately to the income side when they gets invoiced, it's all going to be affecting your profit and loss account only. So the expense section and then the income section at the top. What we're ultimately going to be telling QuickBooks to do with these when we're setting everything up, of course, first telling it which expense category to put this in whenever we initially purchase the thing on the profit and loss. And then the most important thing, at least in terms of this setup and what's actually the most confusing part of this setup, is telling QuickBooks where to put the income whenever it ultimately gets added on to the customer invoice. And you have the option, you have the option to just include one income account, just one dedicated line item, something like unbilled expense income, something like that on your profit and loss. Or if you want to break it down into separate line items, income items on your profit and loss, setup gets a little bit more complicated, but we're also going to go over that, of course, as well in this video and how to set that up. And the way that I personally like to set this up right now is a little unorthodox, and also it's not the way that QuickBooks tells you to set it up. But I believe right now that this is the best way to do it in the most flexible way, because I think currently the way that QuickBooks wants you to set it up, I think it's kind of broken. I don't think it works, and I think it's overly complicated. And I also think that right now, at least with the way that my chart of accounts is looking, that you can't even do it this way. But hopefully this kind of workaround will work for you in your business. But go through the video and try setting it up and see if it'll work for you. But having said all that, so the first thing to set it up is going into your settings in the gear icon here in the top right, and then company settings. The first place to go, so there's actually two places you need to go in your settings to actually set this up, which I don't like, but the first place you need to go is the expenses category here in the left-hand column here. So hit expenses, and then you'll see bills and expenses here. So go ahead and hit this pencil icon. And there's a few checkboxes here that we need to check on in order for us to utilize this feature. The first one is this show items table on your expense and purchase form. So go ahead and check that on. Second one would be checking the track expenses and items by customer. So we'll also need to have that checked on. And then the third one is the main one, which is the make expenses and items billable. So you want to turn on that feature in order to allow us to make expenses billable. And then we'll see here a few options that it gives you that you can add on. So of course, the main one that we definitely want to turn on is this track billable expenses and items as income. And then once we turn that on, it gives us two options here. So we have the ability to track it in a single account or in multiple accounts. The workflow that I'm going to show you, this won't matter what you choose here, because I don't think this is good right now. I don't think this works. So for the workflow that I'm going to be showing you, it's not going to matter which one of these you choose, because we're going to kind of work around this. And so for now, we're just going to leave this as single account, and I'll explain why later, but we're going to set it up to where you can set it up in as many accounts as you want in terms of the income accounts. If you want to do sales tax, if you want to forward that over ultimately to the client or the customer, you can check that here. And then also too, we have this markup. And again, I'm going to keep this unchecked. I don't like the markup system. The only way, really the time when I would check this box is that if you are definitely going to be putting all of these income accounts into one income account, or if you don't mind a separate markup item that's the same no matter what the income and items actually are. And it was kind of confusing, but I'll have this check for now so you can see what it looks like. But I personally don't like checking this because it just adds some complications and things down the road here. We'll see whenever we're doing all this and how it shows up in the profit and loss. Let's go ahead and hit save here. And my workaround kind of goes around this, but the reason I don't like this is because you also need to go into advanced here, the advanced settings, and then under this chart of accounts here, then you'll see other settings that are also directly related to these settings in the expenses. I wish they would have put these right underneath, all in the same spot. It's kind of confusing that you have to do. You have to start out the settings here in the expenses, and to finish it, you have to go down to the advanced into this section to finish it off. But that's the way it's set up currently. And so the first one is the billable expense income account. So this would be where you would normally choose which income account these expenses are going to go to. But again, we're going to bypass this because I don't like this system. But this one here, so you have the markup income account. Before, we were looking at the expenses and we made this with the default markup rate. So they separate these out. And if you were to do this way, then the item itself, when you sell it, would go to one income account, and then the separate markup will go to a separate account. So if you have a $100 item and you mark it up 20%, it would show $100 to whatever income account the item is, and then it'll show $20 into a separate markup income account rather than putting $120 into one income account. And the way to assign where that markup goes is to choosing under this markup income account which account to put it under. And most likely what this will be is an income account in your chart of accounts, which that is essentially the different line items on your profit and loss. So under these income accounts here in your chart of accounts, these are the potential accounts that's on the top of your chart of account or on your profit and loss. And so you can choose a separate markup account. You can put it under the same income account, or you can create a new income account and assign to that. But again, I don't like using any of this, so we're going to try not to. But if you do just really want to have the ability to automatically assign a markup, if there's multiple people doing this and you want to make sure that they remember to mark up the expense, then you can keep this with the default rate of whatever percentage you want. Just know and understand that if you do that, you have to come to the advanced here and choose the income account that the markups specifically are going to go to, because they will separate them out. But without working on that, here's the workaround that I like to use with this. If you do want to do this process and be able to do billable expenses, what I like to do is, rather than working through your chart of accounts, which is what it wants you to do, so ultimately what it's supposed to do, whenever you turn this billable expenses on, whenever you edit or create new expense accounts, what it's supposed to do is give you the option to check a box that says billable expense and then choose the income account. But as you can see with this new chart of accounts, there is no box here to check it as billable. Unless I'm missing something. If I am, please let me know. But it is not, at least for me, showing in the way that the chart of accounts used to look to be able to check that. Same thing if you hit edit. I don't see anywhere here where you can mark it as billable and then assign the income account for it, for the actual categories. So there's two things. So there's something within QuickBooks Online, this kind of workflow that I want to discuss here. And so that's the relationship between, so your chart of accounts, and again, these are the actual line items on your profit and loss, in this case, on your profit and loss reports. And then you have the items or the products and services list as well in QuickBooks Online. And then you also have, because again, we checked that one box where it says you can do expenses by line item. So let's look at an expense, for example. So you have potentially two boxes here, sections that you can put items into. And so you have category details and item details. And what you can essentially do, under category details, that is choosing bulk expense accounts in your chart of accounts for your profit and loss. Or you can choose individual products or services, which is under this list. But the secret here, not really a secret, but the thing is that whenever you're creating these items, these products and services, you have to assign the income account and the expense account. And what you're assigning with that is you're assigning which chart of accounts, which again are linked to your profit and loss, income and expense. So you need to tell for the products and services which chart of accounts those are linked to. And so what we're going to do is, rather than working in the chart of accounts in the expense categories in this particular workflow, is that we're going to create separate items, actual items, product service items, and then we're going to link those to chart of account category, expense, and income accounts. And then we're going to use that in order to track the expense and the income whenever we're going to ultimately mark them as billable. And that's, we're going to tell it for each individual item of what that's going to look like on your chart of accounts in your profit and loss. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say we're setting this up, and let's say for simplicity's sake here that we're going to have two potential expense kind of categories that we're going to ultimately be billing to our customers and charging our customers for. We're going to have regular job supplies, and we're going to have fuel or gas for driving to a client, to a workshop or a work site or whatever. What I would suggest to do in order to make this happen is to first, like I mentioned, create a new actual item in your products and services list, and then we're going to link that to the correct expense and income account. And so we're going to create a new item here. So we're going to go new. For this case, let's just make it non-inventory. And let's say the first one, let's do job supplies. And then we have these checkboxes here. So it's automatically checked that you sell it to customers. And then what you can do on this screen is choose the income account. So all this stuff we were doing before, we have the check box to do the income account. So here you can choose the income account, and it's a lot more straightforward, I think, doing it this way. And so you can choose whatever or create whatever income account. And again, this is your chart of accounts, and this is going to be what's on the top line of your profit and loss under the income section. You can choose whatever account it needs to be. So it can be this billable expense income if you want it to be, but it can also be whatever you want. You can just put it under the bulk regular sales account, or you can create a new sales account for that. So whatever works for you, you can make it for this individual item, whatever income account you want on your profit and loss whenever you ultimately sell it to the customer. What we're going to do for this one is we're just going to make it go under sales. We don't really care if it's broken down into billable expense or anything. So we're just going to put this one under parent sales. Remember when you're doing this, because we're going to use this item to both categorize it as an expense when we buy it and charge to the customer. So we also want to check this box, which is that you purchase it from a vendor. Now we have the option to choose the expense account. And this is going to be whenever we add this to an expense with the line, with the item, which expense category, again, on your chart of accounts, in which category on your chart of accounts, which goes to your profit and loss, we want to put this under. And for this one, let's say, for example, we want to put it under the job supplies expense category, which is going to show up again under profit and loss. And so we just kind of forced it in a much more manual, but also customizable, and in my opinion, straightforward way. We're basically forcing QuickBooks Online with this whole billable expense and income process. We're forcing it to put it in certain expense categories and put it in certain income categories in a much more, in my opinion, straightforward way. And this is very customizable. You don't have to do the check multiple income accounts and try to find it in chart of accounts or anything like that. So we're going to save and close this. All right, so now we have a new product and service listed here or created. So how this would work, so let's say now that we bought some job supplies and right now we just want to make it an expense. Let's say we spent $100 on job supplies. We want to categorize it as an expense out of our bank account, and we want to mark it as billable so that whenever we ultimately charge the customer for it, we want to remember it and be able to easily add it to the invoice. What you can do is just create a new expense in QuickBooks Online. Do everything else as normal. Choose your payee. Choose your bank account. And then again, we have these two sections here. We have the category section, and then we have the items detail section. And because we're working with an item and not a bulk expense category directly, we're going to go to the item details section. And under here, we're going to choose the item that we just created, which is that job supplies item. And we're going to put it in for however much it costs. And then at this stage, we now see this billable checkbox here because of the settings that we did before. So we're going to go ahead and check it. And here it shows the 20% markup. I'll leave it for now so you can see what it looks like when I'm talking about the profit and loss, and then choose the customer that is ultimately going to be billed to at the end of the day so it tracks everything as it should. So we're going to go ahead and save and close that. And one quick note before we add it to the invoice, I just want you to know that at any point throughout this process, you can look up this unbilled charges report and see what charges are out there that haven't been billed yet that are billable. And you can keep track of them that way. So just know there is a report out there to keep track of these. But for now, we're not going to use this in order to find it to add it to the invoice, but I just want you to know that that's available. But at this stage, let's say it's a month later, we used the job supplies and we went out there and we did the job, and now we want to invoice this customer and we want to make sure that we include those $100 of supplies on the invoice to the customer. So we're going to hit new invoice. And then what's going to happen is as soon as we choose the customer, with it being the same customer on the invoice, in the right-hand column here, there's going to pop up and it's going to show the billable expense, or if there's multiple expenses, it'll show them. And then you can add them all if there's a bunch, or you can add, and then it just quickly and easily adds it over into your invoice here. And now we'll see, again, another reason why I'm not a huge fan of the markup thing that QuickBooks uses, but it's because it gets kind of confusing, especially if you have a bunch of these. But so it has the regular job supplies line, and then it creates a separate line for the 20% markup. So your customer won't see this. Whenever you do send the invoice, it will just show job supplies for 120. It won't show what you originally cost, but this is how it shows up on your screen whenever you first do it. Let's go ahead and close this, and then let's look at our profit and loss, so you can see what's actually happening on your reports here. So if you look at your profit and loss, what that just did was that whenever we originally bought it for the $100, it gave the $100 as the job supplies expense category, which is what we assigned it to, which is great. And then whenever we sold it, because we marked it to go under just sales, it marked the $100 in sales. And then as I mentioned before, it does a separate line item here for markup. And so if that's what you want, or if that's what you like, great. But that's what it looks like on your profit and loss. I'm going to go ahead and take off the default markup rate. Now, let's say though that we also want to have billable expenses for automobile fuel, for driving to customer sites or whatever. And let's say that we want to have that as a separate line item on our income, on our profit and loss statement. We want to have a separate income account that says, let's say, reimbursed mileage or something like that. And the way you would do that, so let's first go into your chart of accounts. So again, you want to always work backwards with this workflow. You want to create whatever the chart of account is of whatever you want it to ultimately lie on your profit and loss. And then you want to create the product and service and link it to that chart of account. And so let's create a new, if you go to chart of accounts and then new income, let's say we want to charge it under this billable expense income as a sub account. And now what we're saying here is that we want all the vehicle gas that we bought, that we ultimately charge your customers, we want it to show up in a separate line item under profit and loss at the top in the under income. And we want it to say reimburse mileage for that. So now we're saving in the chart of accounts. So we want to make sure we have an income account in our chart of accounts and also an expense account that we want both of these, or this one item, to be associated with whenever we're purchasing it and whenever we're selling it. And in this case, I believe, yes, we have a fuel auto expense already in our chart of accounts. If you didn't, you can add whatever the expense is. So now our chart of accounts is all good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new product and service, and we're going to link it to those accounts in the chart of accounts. So let's hit new here. Again, we can just do non-inventory service, whatever you want, doesn't really matter. It says we're going to name it vehicle gas. And again, this box is automatically checked. So here we can choose the income account. And once again, this is the income account on your chart of accounts, which is going to be the line item that's going to ultimately show up in your profit and loss. And again, we want to make it that new account that we just created, which is this reimbursed mileage income account. And so we can choose that. Once again, It's going to be a billable expense. So we want to check this box to say that we buy it. And then we're going to choose whenever we purchase this item, which expense account and chart of accounts on your profit and loss you want this to be. And once again, we have our vehicle fuel expense. So we're going to choose that. So we're going to save and close that. And now let's just work through another example where we use both of them. Now let's say we just bought some gas to drive to a customer site and we want to ultimately bill them for that later on. Same thing, new expense, everything's the same. We're not choosing under category here, automobile. We're going to use this item detail here. So not category details, but item details. And we're going to choose that new item that we just added in for vehicle gas. Let's say it was $50. And again, we're going to check this billable. And then we're going to choose the customer. So let's go ahead, save that. Now let's say it's a week later and we just bought some job supplies for that same job. And again, under the items here, and you can type in to search if you have a lot, but we're going to choose the product and service. Right, the amount that we bought it for, and again, billable to that same customer. Save and close that. And what that's doing so far is that's just racking up expenses on your profit and loss under those assigned categories that we chose whenever we were originally creating those items. So we have some expenses now in job supplies and also in fuel. And we don't have any income yet for that transaction yet. We have the original 120. The original 120 that we got from the first example. But now let's say it's a month later and we're finally going to invoice this customer. And again, what's going to happen, so we have the two separate billable expenses we just did. So we can just hit add all. And what it does, it just brings over both of those transactions or both of those expenses that we want to add on. And then from here, if we want to mark it up, we can change the rates to whatever we want. So that can be another option if you want to do it this way. There's a few ways you can work with the markup. It doesn't have to be one or the other. There's a few ways. So play around with it and see what works for you. If you just want to do it manually like this, then it just becomes clean and easy because the markup value goes to the same income account, which kind of it seems to make more sense to me than trying to break it out into a separate account. But again, that's up to you. But anyway, so it brings it over. We've marked it up a little bit. We're going to close that, send it to the customer. And then let's refresh our profit and loss report here. And then now we'll see, of course, the expenses are what they were. And then now that we sold that through that invoice, so now we have the separate line item here in our profit and loss for reimbursed mileage. And that's just including the gas that we got reimbursed for. And then we also have the other amounts in this sale here. It was $100 in sales because of the job supplies that we sold back to the customer. Yeah, so this is kind of an alternative that I've found with the whole reimbursed expense thing. It's not the way that it's supposed to work in QuickBooks. What you're supposed to do through these settings is work only in your chart of accounts and choose items to refer it to. But again, there's a few reasons why I personally don't like it, at least not right now with the chart of accounts, but you can try that out if you want. But if it doesn't work for you, just know that this system that I just went over is available. And again, this system is first making sure you have chart of accounts ready to go, and then creating a new product item, linking it to those chart of accounts here and here on where you want it in your balance sheet or in your profit and loss. And then from there, it's straightforward. You create the expense, mark it as billable, bring it over to the invoice using the item and not the category. And it does exactly what you tell it to in terms of which expense category and which income category to mark it onto your profit and loss. And I just wanted to introduce this kind of workaround that I found, and hopefully it'll work for you and be a little bit more flexible and hopefully more straightforward than the way that QuickBooks currently is trying to present it to you.